Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's Conversationality brought to you by Optionality. And this is an informal, every other week or so discussion video podcast that we do to talk about all the things going on around the now of work and the changing times for those of us who are in creative work, media work, tech work, all of the above, entrepreneurs, not entrepreneurs. Usually, my co founder, Jory, I'm Elisa Camahort Page, and usually my co founder, Jory Desjardins is with me, and she might pop in later. Be prepared. But true to the nature of optionality, she had a little thing come up with a life thing, and she had to pop out and take care of it. And it's totally fine and no big deal because that's what optionality is all about. And this week, I'm super excited because we're joined by Becky Mollenkamp, who's someone I've known for a few years, and I appeared on her podcast. She is a feminist business coach. She also has founded the Feminist Podcast Collective. And so, you can tell she's got that feminist in the title of everything she does. And I love that for her. And the latest thing that she has done that we are here to talk about is her new book called Liberate Your Business. I read a galley of this book and I loved it. And it's basically how to reframe the idea. She'll correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm hearing is that what I read was that it's about reframing the idea of what building your business has to look like, where those ideas come from that are sort of ingrained in your brain about what it needs to look like, and how you can start to rethink and reframe and build a business that works for you and that aligns with your values. And this has kind of been my shtick for many years to figure out how to do that. And I will tell you all what I gave Becky in a blurb about the book after I read it, which is that I loved that it approached the problem from many directions. It provided many different ways to think about it, steps to take, actions, resources. It was like, I thought there was something for everyone there. And in case you thought that sounds like, oh, that's just going to be a flood of information. She also had in every chapter, like, just start with this one thing. And I loved that too, because I felt like for a skimmer like me, or an impatient person like me, or an overwhelmed person like me, like just going and do the one thing seems very manageable to me. So I was really excited to invite Becky to be on Conversationality today. So Becky, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. What I'm hearing you say is such perfect coaching language. So great job.
Thank you. Before we dig into your book, I just love to ask everyone I ever interview about their sort of origin story, a la superhero origin story. So you are now obviously super focused on aligning your business with your values, and that may change the way it looks, and it may not be the norm of what people are used to seeing. But like, was that you as a kid? Were you like a little kid on the picket line? Like what were you like as a kid?
Well, it depends on how we define kid, right? Like little kid, no. I did in my teen years, I became more activist minded. I've always been in the newspaper. I was kind of the nerd in school who did very well and got A's, and was the editor of my high school paper and the editor of my college paper. And, I did journalism for degrees. And I remember getting death threats in high school from an editorial I wrote about killing Bambi. I was a vegetarian for a long time and had very strong opinions about things. And, when you're 17, you think you know everything and everything you think is right. And, wrote an editorial, and one of the teachers, I think it was the shop teacher, didn't like it and had his class write letters to the editor, but many of those included death threats. So that was interesting. Yeah. And I mean, I campaigned for NARAL during Bill Clinton's second term while I was, in college. And I've always thought of myself as a feminist. I have campaigned for pretty much every Democrat for president through Obama. And I did get a little jaded by my late 30s and sort of lost my way with traditional politics, because the more I began to understand how my feminism was not intersectional, and the more that I began to go down that path, the less I felt excited about traditional, like vote blue, no matter who kind of politics. But I have always thought of myself as long as I can remember, a feminist. I was a sassy reading Ms. Subscribing at an early age, feminist. And it wasn't until much later that I started to understand that I was acting pretty classically like a white feminist, doing white feminism and not really understanding intersectional feminism. And that came later. But yes, my origin story is definitely one of like, we're going to change the world for women. And that really probably meant for me.
Where did you grow up?
St. Louis, Missouri, where I still live.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I moved away for a long time, but I'm back.
Oh, nice. Okay. So you were also, I know from reading your book, you were also very career motivated. You wanted to excel. You did excel when you went and struck out on your own as a consultant. You were really, you describe so well the whole mechanism that's out there about funnels and business development and the whole kind of path you get into. That's the recommended path, I should say, about how to build your business. And then somewhere along the line, you also got a little disillusioned with that, I guess I would say. And can you tell me a little bit about what happened in there?
Yes. Well, to be clear, I would have said I was career focused, but I recognize now I was gold star focused. I wanted achievement for achievement's sake and for what I thought it would give me, which is I thought that was going to fill my cup and make my life so much better when everyone just finally recognized how great I was, right? Because I didn't think I was great. I needed other people to let me know, right? I had fallen into that trap. So that looked like a lot of ambition, but the ambition wasn't motivated by a desire to help, to change things, to improve things. It was truly driven by, I need people to validate me. So, and that's icky to say now, but I know there are people who can probably relate if they can get really honest with themselves. So that's sort of the first piece of that. Yeah. And I did end up translating into a lot of success on paper, right? Like it looked really impressive. My traditional career through corporate America. And then when I went out on my own and, first year out was making six figures and doing all I girl bossed a little too close to the sun, I would say. Like I bought into the girl boss path. I really thought that, I was going to be one of those folks. And what changed things for me, really, there was two sort of defining moments in my life, which I do talk about in the book. First, in 2010, when my brother died from a heroin overdose, at the same time I was getting a divorce, and my world completely shattered. That was the first moment of like me waking up to the piece of living for gold stars is not a very fulfilling life. And it was none of that external validation was ever going to change whether I loved myself, and life was too short to not love myself. Life was too short to be worrying about what everyone else thought and all of that. That was the first sort of piece of pivotal change for me personally. And then for the part around better understanding my feminism, how my work was reinforcing models that I didn't want to be reinforcing. That came in 2014 when Michael Brown was murdered a half a mile from my front door by a police officer in Ferguson. And, I think as a lot of white folks can imagine, like there's the shame of it taking that long, and the shame that it was like, it took for it to be outside my door for me to really recognize it. But that is what it took. It woke me up because as a journalist, I was doing a lot of research. I wanted to better understand why people were as angry as they were, and why I wasn't feeling it as acutely, that anger, even though it was right outside my door too, right? And that led me down to better understanding of how my feminism for so long had been centered through a white lens, and how that needed to change for me to really live into what my actual values are, which is about like, I want the world to be better for all humans, not certain humans. And the way my business runs, the way I live my life, the choices I make are all part of that. And I wasn't living that at the time. And that was sort of the second and biggest really wake up call for the way I run my business.
So let's just like put some specifics on that. And you do a great job of this in the book of sort of providing these revised glossaries and definitions and pointing out. So what are some examples? Like, it's hard to imagine if you were a consultant, just building your consultant business, like how badly could you be living off your values, just trying to do that? But it's all in the language and framing that reinforces social messaging. So can you give a couple of really specific examples of what you looked at now and kind of realized, oh, I do not like this and what I am saying right here?
Well, I was one of those. First of all, I'll start at where the book starts, which is around mindset, because I was doing a lot of quote unquote mindset coaching, which was doing a lot of harm without me realizing, because I was very often making something that was a societal systemic issue into a personal failing with my clients, a think your way out of it kind of approach, right? And that is not only not helpful, it can be incredibly harmful, most especially for folks who have all sorts of marginalized identities, for whom just thinking differently doesn't change the structural reality of their existence, right? Of what it
Right.
means to be disabled in our world, what it means to be Black in our world, to be a woman in our world, to be queer in our world, right? All of these different ways of showing up. And having that be so reductive down to just change your mindset and you can change your life. And that is a really common thing in the sort of girl bossy space. So that's sort of one of the very early places of starting. But another was like just even in my business tactics. So part of it was in how I was coaching. Part of it was in my business tactics, which was this like idea of building my empire. Like I'm building an empire. And what is empire thinking? I mean, it is a colonialist mindset. It is about conquering. It is about taking from others to create your own space, right? If we look at what empires have been built on over history, it's not something any of us should be aspiring to. It is toxic capitalism at its finest, because it is about how do I extract from someone else to build my own wealth. And that goes against everything I really believe, but didn't really understand that at the time. It just sounded good like, well, yeah, I want to make more money and I'll do that by building an empire and getting rich. And it took a long time for me to start to unpack and sort of tease out how those things were actually really harmful.
I loved the way you talked about certain, like bringing up tactics, creating the tactic of scarcity, create all these traditional marketing tactics. And I was thinking about it recently. I was thinking about it just like yesterday and thinking about the session. Because I really loved that. I mean, I really love thinking about why do we say certain things like, when we know we will bend whatever it is we say if we want to actually secure that customer. If someone really asks nicely, you would let the 11th person in, right? So I was thinking about that because I've been playing around with this new little project built around Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is my favorite TV show ever and has its own complexity around, like, you know, the fact that the creator turned out to be a horrible human. And one of the things that I really, I have a Buffy the Vampire Slayer tarot deck. And 25 years ago, I used to give tarot readings with this other deck. And I used to love tarot. And I really just hadn't done it in a long time. And I decided to relearn for myself and use this Buffy deck and offer like tarot readings, you know, and it could be a tarot reading on its own or a tarot reading with coaching if anybody wanted to go deeper. And I wasn't sure about the idea, but I thought, oh, I will just test the idea. I will set up a hidden link. I will do 10 sessions on Zoom, because it's going to be on Zoom, which is not ideal for tarot. You know, usually you want to do it in person. So I'm like, let me test it. And I will set up 10 slots and just go in just a couple private online spaces I'm in and say, hey, if anybody wants to do one of these pilot readings, like sign up here. And so I have a couple of those slots left. And so I was thinking in your context, like, why 10? Like, what if someone, I do my 10 and then someone's like, I really can't afford to pay for something like this, but I'm really in a quandary. You know, wouldn't I, if it was someone I trusted, wouldn't I do it for them? I probably would. And then, on the other hand, there was a reason. The reason is I don't want to do it forever. Like, I don't want to do it unlimited. I want to test the concept. So it's like, there's a reason, but it's not some concrete, hard, I only have capacity to do 10 because of this. So I'm rambling now a little bit, but I was thinking all through this differently because of you. Like, what is my language around this? Even if I only want to do 10, because after that, if I can't, like, if it's not going to be a real thing, like, why do I even want to like put the time there and let people grab it for that? But I don't have to do the only 2 slots left. And I certainly don't have to do only 2 slots left when there are really 6 slots left, which is what I think most people do, right? You know,
can I just interject quickly to say, I mean, one, I think part of it is doing the interrogation of yourself to challenge yourself on motivation. So is the motivation for limiting spaces a real motivation. In your case, it sounds like it's a couple fold. It's really about capacity. It's about not being sure, and this just being serving as a test. And 10 feels like the good number for a test, right?
Yeah.
Like there is some actual motivation that's grounded in a real need. That's fine. It's
Right.
when we start to put down false boundaries that are the only motivation is to try to manipulate people into a purchase, right? That's not what you're talking about there. You're saying,
Right.
I need for my capacity to honor that and limit this. That's real. And we
Yeah.
need to do more of that too. So on the flip side, like I think part of what I try to do in the book is making sure that I am speaking to both sides of privilege and oppression. Because for people with more privilege, the challenge is usually to interrogate those motivations to see that they are based on a real need and not more of a ingrained conditioning around extraction. For people with less privilege, who are more marginalized, who are typically on the other side of that extraction, often their challenge looks different. The challenge is to interrogate and say, am I giving too much? Am I being too available? Am I thinking in that way of the oppressed mindset, the oppressed experience of, oh, I have to undercharge, give too much, not set any boundaries for myself. And those are two different experiences. And so like as a woman, that's an oppressed identity where you have to interrogate some of that because we are conditioned to people please, but you're also white. And that is another identity that is an oppressor identity. And so we have to interrogate, okay, but is this really about capacity or is it about me wanting to manipulate people? And these are sometimes really challenging conversations to have with ourselves. But my hope is that we at least start to have the conversation with ourselves. Even if you don't change the behavior yet, just beginning to have that question for yourself, to interrogate yourself in that way is a huge change. And sometimes we sit in that space for a while before we actually start to make changes, but it's still part of the process of change.
Well, and it's also something one can do as a solopreneur. You don't have to like there are very obvious things when I think about Blog Her and other positions I've been in where I hired people or where I curated writers or speakers or whatever, where I could do some very obvious things to diversify our workforce, our speaking roster, our editor list, and I never really thought, so I thought about that a lot. Like, and then of course, how do you have policies, whether it's HR policies or speaker policies or whatever, that are inclusive as well. So that's all a realm that's kind of easily understood. Anyone who's hiring, there's a great place to start, which is to interrogate not just your hiring practices, but your advancement practices. But when you're on your own, like thinking about, well, what can I do? I don't have any employees. How do I make a difference? And I honestly had just not, I knew which marketing tactics or language didn't really resonate with me or felt off-putting, I would say off-putting to me, kind of like aggressive and like, don't make me want to leap up and take advantage. But I know they must work on someone because otherwise, why would they be the recommended path? And I'm certain I never really thought that they're off-putting because they express this kind of extractive, exploitive, colonialist, to use your word, mindset around scarcity, around mystery, like this kind of opaqueness. And, it's everything I hate about some of the tools I use where you can't get a human, you can't get support. Like you're like caught in this opaque environment.
You have to go 20 layers deep to find out what something costs.
Right. All of that. And so I thought that was very fascinating because that's something each individual who has mastery over. How are you presenting what you're doing? How are you talking about what you're doing? How are you, because I do kind of, and it feels weird to say this as like a early social media person. Like I have become very, very, I'm filled with ennui at the idea of trying to figure out social media algorithms in which for the purpose of marketing something and getting like a big audience to it. And you as an author, I'm sure you're like, don't tell me that because that's what I got right now. Like I know as an author, like
Yes, and I'm trying to practice a lot of what I'm saying in the book too,
Mm,
and focusing more on relational techniques versus just mass dumping out in the
yeah,
world, because I also know the algorithms are built by these same within and by these same oppressive systems, and are
yes,
not designed for equity and not designed to promote ideas that promote equity. And so they're
right,
not my friend in this, right? So
right,
yeah, I'm not trying to use them. I want to a couple things about what we said. One, these techniques work because they were developed by people who are paid a lot of money to study how to psychologically manipulate people into taking actions. It is a form of manipulation, which is also a form of extraction and is not healthy and not great. And the best people at this are people who have learned this stuff because they are psychologists and they know how to trick you, right? And they're the best practices because they work, but they're not the best practices because they are right or
right,
good, right? Or
right.
healthy or kind or anything else. The other thing I always want to say is, I know we often think this as solopreneurs, I don't have employees, but I just want to go back to, you are your employee, right? You do have an employee and it's you. And so much with solopreneurs, if we look at how we are treating ourselves, we are absolutely treating ourselves with the worst of capitalist mindset.
Ah,
So,
so say more about that. That's so interesting.
I mean, just
And
look at
Jory's about to rejoin, by the
Oh,
way.
okay.
She just let
Look
me
at
know.
burnout, look at overwhelm. If so many people, I was just on a networking call today where one of the things we were challenged to do, and I loved it, was we were going into our breakout rooms to meet other people. And the question was, how often do you take breaks? And how much guilt do you have about taking time away from your work? It's all solopreneurs in this room. And I felt a little out of place in saying that, in fact, I don't feel any guilt when I step away. And the only guilt I feel is my desire to not spend as much time with others because I'm such an introvert.
Yeah.
But most people were saying they don't take time off. They can't. What is time off? How does one do that? And that is so common among solopreneurs. We work ourselves to burn out because that is the model we've learned. Capitalism teaches us to burn ourselves out. And so we
Yeah.
go out and we say, I can't work for the man anymore because it's harmful. I don't like the way this feels. Yet we create our own businesses and do the same thing to ourselves that we've learned. And that's not a healthy work culture. Even if you're the only person in that work culture, a healthy work culture doesn't look like people who don't feel like they can take time off, who feel guilty when they take time off, whose business is, either whether it's true or not, can't function without them inside of them. Like, these are signs of an unhealthy culture, even if it is a culture of one. So we have to remember, we are our employees. So yes, you have employees. Even if you are a solopreneur, you have one really important employee.
That's a good point. Jory, welcome, welcome in. Although, oh, there you are. There's your video. Jory, Becky, Jory.
Right.
I just want to say one thing, that I think it's not just the solopreneur. It's very rooted also in the wider entrepreneurial culture about, like, when people used to when we were doing Blog Her, and people, I don't know, Jory, what your response used to be, but when people would ask me about work-life balance, when we were at the height of everything we were doing, first of all, they wouldn't ask women, they wouldn't ask men about work-life balance. I always made it a practice when I interviewed a man to ask him how he did it all. How did he manage? Because I'm like, no one ever asked the dudes that. But I actually would say, oh, listen, we're a venture backed startup trying to grow and scale, and, like, there's no work life balance really, and that's, for now, that's okay. And I didn't really feel any kind of way about that. Like, I felt that was, like, real, like that was what I had to say. I don't know, Jory, how would you answer that question when you were asked?
Well, I remember just having a visceral reaction after we exited, and I was reading a newsletter from a prominent entrepreneur that you and I both know, who shall remain nameless because I sometimes say his name in vain. Uh, and he was talking about, how to do it right. And he's like, if you're not in debt, living out of your car, all the things to prove you are committed enough to this life. And I remember feeling so, I was viscerally upset with that because I thought, so you're supposed to give up your life, no family, like, come on, no no hobbies, no activities. That's already a given. But it was just so extreme. And it was presented as, you got to show me, if I'm going to invest in your company, that you're willing to go the distance. And I just thought, that's it. I felt compelled to propagate a different way as an advisor to companies, because it's just not sustainable. It's just not.
Well, Becky, I would think that your response to that would be like, it's not designed to be.
Exactly. Yes. Because the kind of model you're talking about, whether it's, because of VC funding or because you're publicly traded, but the traditional sort of paths inside of capitalism are not designed to be sustainable. They're designed to churn and burn, because they look at humans as property, as commodities, as parts of a machine, not as human beings. And the goal is never-ending growth. When your model is never-ending growth, it is not sustainable. Humans can't exist inside that system, and we see it constantly. People are burned out. They burn out. That's what happens to make stockholders or funders happy, right? So that they can fill their pockets. That is classically exactly what toxic capitalism, or in my opinion, just capitalism, some people would call it late stage capitalism. That's what it is. That's the only way it functions. It is about never-ending growth at any cost. Right? How do we make things as productive as possible? How do we increase productivity to the point, and now with AI, it's a whole new game, right? Which basically just means, how do we make humans work as fast and hard as possible until they can't anymore? And does that sound like anything? Right? It takes us back to the origins of this country. So yeah, it's always been that way for this country. And that's all it's meant to do, right? So that the people at the top can continue to amass more at the expense of everyone else. And the constant tension is, how much of that can we do before those that we're extracting from will eventually push back? And we've seen those pushbacks over time. They do happen. I personally feel like we are on the precipice of another one of these sorts of moments, because the gaps have gotten out of control. It's not sustainable. We are again on the precipice of a very big economic challenge. And I think we're going to see it again, because it can't continue that way. Humans are not meant to function this way.
So you were saying earlier
I do have a follow-up.
Oh, yeah.
No, go ahead, Elisa. I'll ask my question after. It's a follow-up on just your comment about company and design.
Oh, well, let's do that now, because I wanted to take her in a different direction slightly.
Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry, you got me going. You described a company that I once worked at, and the model by design was that we would have to literally lob off part of the workforce every year. That was your job. If you didn't do that, then you're on the chopping block. I mean, it was literally built that way. And then by year 4, if you were still there, your job would get twice as hard, because you'd have to re-earn your shares. Like it was just built that way. And it didn't make any sense to me, because it struck me as, well, I mean, your lived experience doesn't want to stay here anymore. How are you going to propagate and keep it going? And yet the company still survives. It's doing very well. And I think that's part of the problem, doing very well, at least in the market.
The stockholders.
Right. So how can, what is it that you think will change that dynamic so that sustainable human flourishing in an organization is actually seen as productive, as a market sign of health?
I am not an idealist who believes that this is going to happen in my lifetime. I would love it, but I don't think we're going to end and topple capitalism as we know it in our lifetimes. I wish that were true. My goal, and I do feel like so much of what I see in business books is kind of the two extremes. Either you just got to buy into it because this is the way it is. So if you want to get your piece of the pie, you just got to, say, well, values be damned. I'm just going to show up this way and at least secure my piece of the pie and for my family. Or the extreme of that is, well, you just basically can't make any money because you got to give everything away and you got to be on the streets fighting all the time and fighting the system. And I don't think either of those extremes is realistic, right? I think there are too many of us for whom We just can't sit in the seat of our soul selling away our values. It doesn't feel good. It burns us out. It's not sustainable. We can't do it. And then the other extreme of like, but also the mortgage company doesn't care if I'm out on the street revolting. Like, I got to pay the bills. So we got to find some middle ground. And that's what the book is about. And it's not specifically written for big corporations because they don't have souls. I don't care what the Supreme Court says. Corporations are human, right? They're not humans. And the people who get to that point, I think, unfortunately, have often sold away a lot of their soul. They are no longer are operating from a value set. They can't see that anymore. They can't function from that place. Where I do think change is real and sustainable is from smaller business owners, folks who have more authority and agency to create change, at least inside of the places where they exist, and that we do it one small business at a time, where we create a different ethos that other people start to see and see us functioning and ask, how are you functioning? And I see this all the time where people decide, well, they've laid me off anyway, or they've laid off half of my friends and I'm burned out. I got to quit. And they start their own thing. You know, there's more and more people doing that. Also, I just want to remind people, there are about 1,100 billionaires in the US. That means there are 330-ish million people who are not billionaires. We have the numbers on our side. If we can remember that and stop buying into the belief that we are conditioned into, that if we just play along, eventually we'll be one of those 1,100, which is the only thing they use to keep us in line, right? This false little carrot they dangle like, well, if you fall in line enough, eventually you might join us in this 1,100 exclusive club. We're not gonna. So we got to figure that out and start to unite in the ways we can. I would love to see more unions starting and actually having a backbone. Obviously, we need to elect politicians that care about workers and take care of them and who are not bought and sold by big corporations and corporate interests. But that's not me. The only thing I can do in my little piece of the world is, how do I look at my little piece of the world and say, hey, in this place where I can, I'm going to reject these norms. There's going to be places where I can't, because I live inside of the real world, right? I got to pay my bills. But as I can, I'm going to say, no, I reject this. I'm not going to burn myself out to play along with some game that I didn't agree to. I don't want to be a part of.
Well, let me ask you, you talked before Jory joined, you talked a little bit about how you were kind of a mindset coach and you realized it was harmful the way you were talking about that. But you certainly, in doing that, you learned about how people can change their mindset and update their mindset. So I think one of the powerful aspects of your book is, if we've been ingrained to think that this is what being a successful entrepreneur or girl boss or founder or whatever, or business owner looks like, if this is what you have to do to be successful, whatever that may mean, if this is what you do if you have ambition, whatever that may mean, how can we take the first steps towards interrogating our mindsets around that to even allow us to try and build businesses in a different way? Where do you ask people to start to unpack the way they've been acculturated? Is that the right word? To do business and think about it in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I just cannot state enough how important awareness is. So in self-interrogation and awareness, because capitalism systems, oppressive systems, want a group of people who are not taking time, who don't have time, who don't have education, who don't have space, who don't have willingness, who aren't interested in actually interrogating systems, right? Because that's when things starts to crumble, when we actually start to notice the systems and then start to ask questions like, who benefits from this? Who told me it has to be this way, right? Those are some of my favorite questions to ask. So anytime you're thinking about a business system, who told me this was the best practice? Who told me this was the right way? Who said I have to do it this way or I should do it this way? And then ask yourself, who benefits from this? Who is harmed by this? And oftentimes the answer is yourself. It shouldn't be causing harm to you either. Even if the answer is not that it's harming your community, it's harming you because it doesn't feel good, right? Because it goes against your value set, or because it means that you're having to burn yourself out, you're having to overwork, you're having to overlook your own needs. That's also important to interrogate. But I think we don't always. I know most of us just don't interrogate anything. We take things sort of as given, and then we just kind of go on autopilot without actually stopping to say, is this mine? Is this what I actually want? I mean, it took me until my 30s to sit there and reckon with myself to say, like, here's this life I have, but is it what I want, right? And I think as women, oftentimes, we are definitely not encouraged to think about what we want because we are only encouraged to care for others. So it's about who does this help? How do I make sure everybody else around me is feeling good? And we end up building businesses that replicate that without actually centering our own needs. So going back to, I was centering my whiteness, we have to watch for that as well. But we do need to make sure we're building businesses that actually work for us, right? That actually feel good to us first. And then thinking about how is this affecting my team if I have one, my clients if I have them, my community, which we don't think about much at all. But yeah, the place to start, I think, is interrogating every business decision you're making, from the tools that you're using to the practices you're using, both to run your business and to perform your business, the ways that you're stewarding your money, all of those places. I would be asking yourself, who told me it has to look this way? And who benefits when I do it this way?
Yeah, there's so many you mentioned money, and I read a book recently called Activate Your Money, I think, by Janine Firpo. And she brought up like things I hadn't even thought about, like where my checking account is and the choices I have. Because I make a lot of choices. I'm like the queen of the boycotts, you know, and I'm vegan and have been for years and years and years. And it's an economic vote for me. It's like, I don't want my money going to some of these, so I'm very, very conscious, but she kind of blew my mind thinking about, well, I never really gave much thought to like, who prints the checks I'm writing, like where, and that there are other choices like than the bank that I see in my little downtown area. Like I just really was like, oh, there's always more. But I actually also think that's the beauty part, which is you're never going to do everything that would perfectly make you aligned with your values, but there's always more you could do. So when you're ready, do that more. Jory, I wanted to make sure, because I know you joined late, and we're coming up on our usual length anyway, although this could obviously be a really long conversation. Did you have any particular questions you wanted to ask or thoughts you wanted to share?
No, Becky, you had me at the culture conversation. I mean, that was my question. I think you have completely nailed this. It's something I've been thinking a lot about. You were saying, oh, it took me until my 30s. Well, it took me a little longer than that before I started.
Well, that was only to even ask what I wanted in my life. It took even longer before I started to understand how that then related to my business, to be clear.
Right? It took me a lot longer than that to figure out, well, wait a minute, maybe this is not the right system. I have been contorting myself to make this work in a way that, that maintains the peace and pays the bills. And after a while, it just wasn't sustainable, even in contorting position. And I'm a great contortionist. I mean, I've been shape-shifting for years. But
most of us are, because we've had to be. Yeah.
Right.
And I just love that you said that, Jory. Yeah. Because I just want to say, these are not systems built for us. The systems are built for a very specific person who sits atop the social hierarchy in capitalism. And that is like the white male ownership class, right? That's who it's built for. And that's a small subset of America. Again, it's a very small amount compared to the majority of us. And yet we're all supposed to fit the model that works for them. And when you mentioned some of these people, I won't name them either, but we all know them, who are out there. You were talking about the ones who are like, you need to be living your car. I'm thinking too of the ones who are talking about like, this is what you need to do for your perfect morning routine. And this is how a $1 million guy, a $1 million person thinks about blah, blah, blah. And they rarely mention the fact that maybe they have a bunch of kids at home that somebody else is watching over, right? One particular person who did a whole series of this, I wrote about this years ago, didn't mention about he basically had free ride to college and that his parents were supporting him for a long time. And he had a wife who watches over his 5 kids and that's her full-time job. And there's all these support structures that are built for that particular small group of people that give them all this advantage that the rest of us don't always have. And I have a whole lot more than a lot of other people have, right? And I still have to contort. And the farther you go down on that hierarchy, the more you're having to try and contort. And it's exhausting. It is not sustainable. And that's a system that doesn't honor your full humanity, meaning if you're a mom, that allows you to be a mom, to go pick up your kids when they need to be picked up, to take the day off because they're sick, whatever that looks like, to be done working when they come home, and I don't just mean that for moms. also for dads. But in this case, I'm talking specifically about the folks who have the more marginalized identities. You know, if you work in a system where you can't show up with your hair in its natural state because it's not deemed professional, like these are things that those people at the top of the hierarchy don't think about because it wasn't built for them. Like the system was only built for them, right? It's not built for the rest of those folks. And those are things that are hidden costs. They're invisible costs that aren't even talking about the amount of hours that we're working necessarily, but even just the way we're working, the way we're being perceived. And that's all part of a culture. And then we go out on our own because those systems weren't built for us and they don't feel good. And then so often we're replicating that for ourselves. We're still buying into the lie that we have to show up looking a certain way to be considered by professional by, you know, our clients or our peers. We're still buying into the fact that if we're not available at 5 p.m., you know, because our kids are home and need us to be with them, but somebody might call us or something like that, we have to be there. We're still making so many of these choices that we've been conditioned to believe we have to. And I just want to challenge people to say, like, again, sometimes maybe you do have to. Maybe for safety, you have to. There may be reasons where you still have to say some of these things I hate, but I still have to contort. But I want you to really interrogate, do you actually have to contort? Or could you make a different choice here? Is it possible?
Let me ask you this as a sort of a final kind of, I envision a wonderful world where those of us who want to run liberated businesses, to use your language, you know, and Jory and I have talked about this kind of thing in the past, that we find each other and work with each other and build like our own playing field. This was, by the way, the first keynote speech at the first Blog Her ever 21 years ago was, do we level the playing field or do we just build our own? And the answer at the time was, I think we got to level what's there because so many of us are still stuck playing there while we're also building our own. So these ideas about like, how do you not your own business, but when you're looking for who you do business with, what are a couple of simple ways that you think about what tools are you going to use? What company are you going to use, or what consultant or what service provider? Like, how do you think about where your money is flowing out to try to build a network, a more mesh network of other liberated businesses? What are some of the directions people can look to start building a different kind of network of businesses around them?
Well, first, I honor the fact of what you said earlier, that we can't live perfectly inside of an imperfect system. So it's not possible. And I think too often we see amongst a more activist-minded group, this sort of push to banish, shame, whatever, people who make choices that are maybe not perfect without honoring the fact that we live inside of a system that's not perfect. There's just no way. You can't be fully anti-capitalist inside of a capitalist system. So first, I just honor that, because there are choices I make that I have to sit with and wrestle with all the time. One specifically right now that you all are probably also sitting with, which is being on Substack as they're platforming Andrew Tate, right? Like, this is deeply disturbing to me. And there's also the reality of, it's the only platform I've been able to find so far with the email list size that I have, where I can send emails without having to pay an arm and a leg that I don't have. So there isn't a great alternative. There's not this like ethical, amazing alternative that fits into my budget at the moment. That's a really uncomfortable place to be. And it's also a reality, right? That many people right now are grappling with. Where I can and where it works with the reality of my existence, as you know, as far as my capacity and my budget, I do try to look at ownership of tools, who's owning this, who's benefiting from it, who uses it. But I'm on Threads. That's a Meta platform. I've left all the other Meta platforms. I'm still on that one because also I have to have places to show up, right? This is also part of the reality. So we have to do that.
We're living parallel lives, Becky.
Yes. Yes. I think many of us with some amount of social consciousness we're all thinking about this. Yeah. We need more feminist created spaces, both for gathering and sharing, and then also for like just tools to use inside our business, because we have to remember the systems were built by white men, and they have 70 legs ahead of everyone else. You know what the VC funding world is like and how challenging it is for women, let alone women of color, to get funding for ideas and alternatives. And by the time they do, they're now 30 steps behind. And of course, the other platform has taken over. So tools are challenging, right? There are things that are really hard. Where I feel like I can make more of a difference, and I honestly feel like it makes a bigger impact, is in the people part of my business. Who I am working with, who I am spending time with, who I am creating space for. And that is where I really focus a lot of my energy on. I do what I call repel marketing. Forget attraction marketing. It's not about attracting the right people. I try really hard to repel the wrong people. I put it out there, and I didn't used to, right? It was really the Dobbs decision, which I talk about in the book, where I finally was like, I'm done. I'm going to be so in your face about how I feel, because I don't want to end up in a place where I was then, where when I decided to share a story about my own abortion story, that I had nasty emails back. I had clients who fired me because I had attracted some of the wrong people, because I was so worried about repelling potential clients. Now I lead with that stuff. I lead with abortion stories. I lead with, Black Lives Matter. I lead with the fact that if LGBT doesn't include the T for you, then you're not a part of my world. Like, I lead with my value set first and foremost. I want to reject everyone who doesn't share that worldview. You can call it an echo chamber if you want, but I look at it like finding collective force of people who are also committed to saying, we want to create change, we care about humanity, and we lead with humanity. So I build spaces for those kinds of folks, because the other people have enough homes. I want to make sure we have.
You can call my thing an echo chamber when we start calling Davos an echo chamber. I mean, like
yes, an echo chamber, and Facebook, yes, it's. I need my echo chamber for my sanity, but also because I do believe, going back to there's 1,100 billionaires and 330 million non-billionaires in the US, change comes through collective action. And that includes at the business level. It comes through the decisions we make about who are we spending time with, who is in the room, who are we inviting into rooms, especially when you have more privilege. Now, when I think about, like, when I get invited to podcasts, I look to see who's been invited. Is the guest list all white women that look like me? Do I know someone else, a Black woman I can introduce to this host to say, hey, I know some amazing Black women that you're overlooking, right? These under-recognized voices. Can I find a way to platform some of these voices to spread these messages? If we have privilege, we have a lot of responsibility. And so that's kind of the way that my activism looks more like being a community architect for under-recognized voices, more than it looks like worrying so much about what tools I'm using for now, because I live in a real world where I have a lot more agency in this space. And that's also where my strengths lie. When you talk about my hero story, like, I'm Wonder Woman of community building. That's my place. So that's what my activism looks like. I love Deepa Iyer's social change map. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I usually have it sitting right here, but it talks about the different ways activism can look. And there's like 9 different paths, right? And it doesn't have to look one way, right? Yeah. And for me, I'm sort of the community architect piece. That's where I show up. But for someone else, it might look like being out on the front lines. It might look like writing, and that's the thing. So we have to find our lanes. And I feel like that's the more realistic approach, is figure out kind of your lane or lanes and stay in those. And you're not going to be perfect because you can't be.
Yeah, that's very much like the book I co-wrote with Carolyn Duran and Jamia Wilson was about, it's a book about activism and advocacy, and we decided to write it in the wake of the 2016 election. But actually, only one of the chapters is about government, and it's much more about how government works and where to go to state your complaints about government, like who's really responsible for what's happening at different levels. It's not really about the current administration or what was the current administration then. But the other chapters are about all the things besides, because definitely vote. Like, there's a little bit in there about protecting your vote, but there's a chapter on civil rights and disobedience and marching and why that matters. There's a chapter on economic, the ways you can make an economic difference in how you buy or don't buy. Shareholder advocacy, you can get things into an annual shareholder meeting with very little stock in hand, very little. Like, any regular person who has stock could probably do that. And we have a whole chapter on digital privacy, because in a surveillance state, protecting your privacy is a radical act. Like, and not letting yourself be tracked everywhere, and do I do all these things perfectly? Like, I reread the chapter. I don't know. I looked at it somewhat recently and I was like, wow, I really meant to do all these things, but like, I do some of them. I do a lot of them, actually. I'm pretty siloed in how I use all these tools. I don't connect them up together too much. But it's just the idea that, hey, your activism and your advocacy, it can look a lot of different ways. and pick the ones that resonate with you around the issues that matter most to you, because another big thing I think is you can't make a difference on 25 different things, because you can't be an expert and know and keep a track of. So you really have to triage. But
well, and when it comes to money, we also didn't mention, and I think it's important to mention, mutual aid, which is another way that I show up as a business owner. One, spearheading mutual aid campaigns. I did my first mutual aid campaign last fall, and it was amazing, life-changing for me, and seeing the power of collective
define
action.
that for people who might be watching who don't know what you
Yeah,
mean?
it's saying, I have money, you have a need, here's my money, go do what you want with that money and take it and fulfill your need. I don't get to oversee how you use the money. It's not a tax deduction. I don't benefit in some way from it. I just see that you're a human with a need and I have more than I need, so let me share, right?
Yeah.
It's really all it is. It's just money moving fluidly between people without getting into gatekeeping and without thinking about benefit and control. That's part of the problem with like traditional nonprofits and things like that. There's all these gatekeeping pieces where people have to prove their need. They have to prove what they do with the money, right? It's falling into that traditional hierarchical structure. Whereas mutual aid says, we're all humans here. And this is how we circulate money around, right? That we just care for each other as a collective. And participating in more of that and seeing how that works and the ways that it empowers individuals is life changing, both for the person who is giving, for the person receiving. And it helps me to rethink business because it's, again, I talk in the book about equitable pricing, which is I use everywhere I can, which is offering different price points where I clearly help people see why they might go into one versus another, which is it's a subtle form of activism of helping educate people about their privilege and helping them understand like, oh, I probably should pay more because I have a college degree. And if I have a college degree, there's some privilege that allowed that to happen. So even if I don't feel wealthy, I do have privilege. And so what does that look like? So anyway, I just think it's important to think about the money piece too, which obviously the book goes into quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Becky. I really enjoyed the book, and I'm excited. It's out on April 30th. Is that right? But you can pre-order it now.
You can order it right now on my website. And the truth be told, I prefer that because I retain more of the money. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, even Bookshop, which I love bookshop.org, but all the places take a nice hefty percentage of it, which is great. If that's how you need to get it, accessibility or anything else, do it. But I'll mail out your little package to you all myself and handwritten with a little note if you order it from my website. But yes, it's available on my website now. It'll be available all the places April 30th. And you can request it from your library, which I really want people to do because I did price it in a way that I made it as cheap as you are allowed to make it for libraries to have access because accessibility is important to me. And I would rather you get it from the library than even pay me. Like do that. That's amazing.
And your website is beckymollenkamp.com.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it'll be right there on the homepage.
Easy peasy. Well, we will share this all in the show notes, the link to your site and a link to and show your cover off and a little bit. But I just really want to thank you for joining us. I really enjoyed the book and thought there was really something for everyone and something not just something for everyone based on their interest or values, but also based on the way our brains work differently. And there were different kinds of content that really I felt broke it down so that I could see how for me, this kind of format is the part I'm gravitating to because that's how I process information.
Yeah. Might be one ADHD brain to another. I don't know because I wrote it for my ADHD brain. So maybe it's receiving it the same way.
I don't know. I felt there are different formats within each chapter. There's this section, then there's this kind of thing, then there's this kind of packaging. And I felt that was very smart. I thought I was giving you a whole bunch of credit. You didn't need to turn away there, that you were really smart and thought of that too, along with everything else, which you have thought of.
Well, thank you very much. It's really an honor and also incredibly vulnerable to put your work out in the world in this way, as I'm discovering in ways that I didn't even know. But I really appreciate your support and thank you for everyone who's listening or watching. And go out and in our own little square of the world, make the changes we can, because I know we all can dream of a better world.
That's for sure. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you. Thanks, Jory. Thanks, Elisa.